All right, we're in the book of Proverbs, end of chapter 18. So verse 19 is where we will start. But before we get started, I just wanted to kind of share with you something I was thinking about, and something that's kind of, I've wondered over the years, and there's lots of answers, but when I was a kid, I used to wonder, people would get saved, and then you'd have like this really godly fearing, usually a woman, but sometimes men. Seems like women seem to be more sensitive and less jaded frequently. But you'd have these godly grandparents or something, and then you'd have things peter out, and then somebody would get saved. And I always wondered what happened. Why do people get saved, and then they try to bring up their kids, and then you have this falling away. And I suppose there's lots of reasons. I think the biggest one, honestly, is just sin, the temptations of sin, and the simple fact that, there are sacrifices of being a Christian, and they're more than worth it. But coming to church is. When I was a kid, we had a church that was Baptistic, and they got rid of the one pastor, and then they got in a newer pastor who was more modern and stuff. And then we stopped singing hymns, and we started doing worship songs and whatnot. And my dad was very unhappy about it. But, we're in a small town. That's the only Christian church there. And back then you wouldn't drive 35 miles. That was a big deal. That was something we would do once a month or so. And then every maybe 6 months we would go to Twin Falls, which is 75 miles one way. That was, nowadays, with cars and just our affluence and whatnot, you could say, oh, just go to the next town. But it still takes time. Anyway, what's my point? I didn't want to go to church. Once my dad made it clear to me that he wasn't happy, I was just like, why don't we just not go? And a few times we would sit in the car. We'd get dressed up to go to church, and we'd just go out. We'd sit in our car, and we'd listen to a message from Bob Jones that he had gotten from Bob Jones University, because he was so unhappy with the messages that the pastor was preaching. And as a kid, you really get that, I'd just rather be lazy and stay home. And as you get to become an adult, you realize, and hopefully when you're a teenager, you realize that too, that there's really good reasons. Plus, God says to go to church and whatnot. But I find it sad, and I find it, it's a little discouraging to see, kids who have been taught, and then they go, yeah, I'm just not going to do it. I'm not going to go to church. I'm not going to do these things. It's like, and I personally, I judge everything through my lens, and I'm at least somewhat aware that not everybody views things the way I do. I need to be more aware of that. But I've never understood how you can just ignore God. And I don't know if it's just being jaded. I don't know if they're hardening their heart. I don't know what it is. Me personally, I can't see their hearts. So all I can do is I can pray for people. I can try to teach my kids, as I have tried. They at least know how I feel. And there's nothing specific that set this off. I have 2 boys in the Marines, and that's not conducive for a good spiritual walk which is why I discouraged both of them, because I think that's important. But, God has his plan for people in their lives. I don't know where they are spiritually, and I don't know their specific heart or anything, but I know that God's in control. And so, whereas it's kind of easy to get discouraged when you see, you want to teach people stuff, but they have to, one, be willing to accept it. So they have to, take that knowledge in, and then two, understand it, but then three, apply it. And here we go, back to the principles of wisdom, right? So I think most of our kids understand. I think they have the knowledge at the very least. And I think they understand, not fully though. I think that's part of the issue, right? And I think they also understand God. God is very forgiving. He's very patient. He's very kind, and he's not going to bring the hammer down immediately. So I think the best thing, with kids at least, is you just hope for that whatever lesson that they learn, whatever chastisement they get, isn't life destroying, life altering. There are some mistakes that kids make that can destroy their lives, but God can still use them. It's just, it's interesting. I don't know. I don't think it's specifically Father's Day that's made me reflect on that. On Saturday, I tend to spend more time, either zero or more time with God. I'm either too lazy to do it, or I because I'm not rushed, I can actually spend a lot more time with God. And not zero, but I don't do nearly as much as I should. And so I was contemplating the falling away of Christian people. But sin draws, and the Bible says my yoke is easy and my burden is light. But there is a bit of a burden, there is a bit of a responsibility, and we don't like that. People don't like that. They don't like having to do stuff. Wednesdays are hard for me because I have to go to church, right? No, I need to go to church, okay? But lots of times I'm really tired after work, etc. But even if it wasn't church, if it was something else I had to do, or needed to do, or got to do, however you want to look at it, it would still be this burden over me. So between that and just the kind of rebelliousness of people in general, thank you for being here. Thank the Mikes for finally coming back. Or Mikes, the Roos. The Mike family. I do appreciate that. I did actually miss them. I was kind of surprised, but I did. So I was happy. I was like, he's not back yet? Anyway, I am thankful. I think as a father, it's really nice to be able to reflect on having a godly father and having a father who loves me. And so it's an example for me, and it chastens me a little bit or convicts me a little bit when I am not being a very good father to my children, when I'm being frequently too hard on them. And then I've been probably too hard on my kids or in certain ways, because this world is so incredibly soft. It is so soft, and it's the people, the men we are creating are so, I know Kelly doesn't like getting his hands dirty, but I know he can do it. I've seen him. He's done it for church and stuff, but he spends most of his time working, but young men can't change tires. It's tough for most women because that can really take some muscle. But a man should be able to change a tire, but most men don't even know how and would just call AAA or whatever and sit there on the side of the freeway for 2 hours and wait for it. My wife, when she was coming back, they had rented a car, and the tire blew out on the way back to the airport. Who knows if they would have been there for a long time. I guess they wouldn't have missed their plane because they were spending the night for a few hours in Detroit. But anyway, I thank God on this Father's Day for being a good, godly father that's an example to us fathers, and that we can just thank him, and we always have somebody to look up to. And with that speech, I guess, I'll go on with Proverbs 18. 18, verse 19. A brother offended is harder to be won than a strong city, and their contentions are like the bars of a castle. This verse I've thought about quite a bit, because I know it's true, because I am easily offended. Much more so when I was younger, but I still have a basic temperament. It's ironic, I'm probably misusing the word, everybody does, but I find it funny that, I can be thin-skinned and easily offended, yet I am blunt and rough with other people. Like, wouldn't you think if I was easily offended, I would be nicer to other people because I would know how that feels? Well, the answer is no, because my daughter Liberty is very much the same way. So I have to try to teach her, hey, when you say these things, you're lacking tact. But she's getting much better at that. So we shouldn't aspire to offend people. That's kind of like the term troll on the internet. That's basically what a troll is. A troll is posting something out there to get a reaction, to basically irritate people and get them all stirred up and whatnot. And, sometimes trolls are people who are doing it and they believe what they're saying, but they're aggressively going out and just causing trouble. And sometimes there are people who don't, they're just doing it for fun. But I'm always confused. I go to read a conservative political website, and you have all these liberals in the comments, and they're basically trolling. They're causing problems and arguments within the comments. It's like, go read your liberal stuff. We'll read our conservative stuff. And, but it's easy to be offended. If you want to be, at least. You can work on that, though. In society, we have shifted the burden from the person who is offended to the offender. And the first instances of that I actually noticed was with the sexual harassment policies. I don't know, at least 15 years ago, we had some sexual harassment training here at a company in Fruitland, and the HR lady, who I think she had come over from Micron, one of the things she said was that it didn't matter what you meant, it mattered how it was received. And my boss, I give her credit for she made a big deal about this, not to the person, but she went and she got clarification. She was like, so it doesn't matter if I said something that was completely non-offensive, if they took it in an offensive way, back then it was just sexually, That's on me. And that upset her. And I was like, yeah, that's good catch. That's really a big deal. And now that's how everything is. If you offend somebody, we need to be able to live our life without being offended all the time. And as a Christian brother or sister, I would say it's doubly important, right? It's easy to be offended if you want to be offended. It's easy sometimes to be offended because people can be blunt and lack tact, like me, or because I didn't shake your hand or something. Okay, hopefully people here, know me well enough now that nobody would be offended by that, but I've told the story of a lady who was offended that I didn't greet her when I came in with my twin children and stuff. So one of the things that I was pondered on was, okay, a brother here. I think in general, we shouldn't try to offend anybody. But this is actually specifically talking about a brother, not a neighbor. So a brother is a member of your family. So it stands to reason to me that we are talking about a fellow Christian. But once you offend somebody in your family, I mean, you can have a feud over that. That can cause a church split. At the very least, somebody stops coming to church. And so it's important to have your antenna out. And it's one of the reasons the pastors are so sensitive about church attendance, is because the trend is always, hey, okay, they came faithfully 3 days, 3 times a week, and then, well, now they stopped coming to this one or that one, or they're spotty, and then slowly they're, that's the trend. And that trend holds true, almost always. But it is possible to always have a brother offended and that just, and we had that here. We had that here once. It was so frustrating. Thankfully, it was before Pastor Hensley. So it's tough though when the person causing the offense is the pastor. That makes it a lot harder because I have to support my pastor. But pastors are human too. So about all I can do is talk to the pastor. But I can't go to Kelly and say, whoa, that was, I don't agree with pastor here. Because frequently it's like, hey, maybe he caused offense, but it was in a just way. So I can't undermine, I can't go talk to Kelly and say that was wrong, because all I can do is talk to pastor. And if he doesn't receive it, I'm kind of out of options because he hasn't done anything. It's not like he's spouting heresy or something. So those are really difficult situations that I've been in. And I think if we can just pay attention to other people and other people's feelings, and if you find somebody that is offended or isn't being friendly to you, well, I think praying about it is good, but is a good first step. Sometimes people are just unfriendly. They're having a rough day or something, or whatnot. But it does make sense for you to carefully, without any malice, without any agitation, without any pride, talk to that person. They're harder to be won than a strong city. Their contentions are like the bars of a castle. Frequently, the offense it's legitimate. Like they're injured for a reason. Should we take a 5-minute recess? Their feelings are hurt for a just reason. Like you did something wrong. And I have been upset at somebody for something where I believe it was an injustice, but then I realized that I was sinning by being angry about it still. And once I realized that, I was able to let that go and, kind of forgive and forget. Because people are human. And that's what we don't give people that grace most of the time, unless you've learned it and you can apply it. And even pastors are human. So that's, it's important. Pastor Hensley, I think, is the best pastor we've ever had. And I don't say that lightly, because we've had some good pastors. We really have. That one of the things I've been impressed by him is if I say something to him, he doesn't go, well, God wants me to do, or whatever. He doesn't give me that as a response. He listens to me. And if I'm so he doesn't use like, I'm the man of God, you need to get your heart right. And I appreciate that. So the best thing we can do is not offend somebody, but if they are offended and it's not getting better, I think that's when it's important to try to find a way to reach out. And that's where a mediator might be handy. It depends on the person. And I think personally, don't get mad at me for this, but I think that this tends to be more of an issue with women. I have this issue personally, so I tend to imagine slights sometimes. But I've seen it with lots of women, sisters and daughters, and hey, this person did this or didn't do that. And I'm like, yeah, they probably just had a rough day or something. Just let that go. So anyway, I think I've harped on that enough, but I think I do think it's really important, and I think it's worth spending the time on it because of the whole, you don't want to be the reason somebody doesn't come to church anymore, right? You don't want to do that. You don't want to quit going to church yourself. You want to mend those fences so that there can be peace and you can have unity in the church. Because if you don't mend those fences, pretty soon you're mad about that, and then instead of us having business meetings that go a minute and 30 seconds, if that, well, then we're having conversation about well, I don't know that pastor should be getting a raise. We just gave him a raise, blah, blah, blah. I only get a raise once a year, if that, So we start arguing over stuff like that, and there was one time I remember hearing somebody say something like that. This was a long time ago. Church was still over in Ontario. And somebody said they didn't want their tithe being used to pay for pastor's cell phone. I'm like, we don't give our pastor a salary. So, thankfully they had no control over that, right? And we didn't advertise any of that stuff, but I still remember it, and I marveled about it. And anyway, I will move on. A man's belly shall be satisfied with the fruit of his mouth, and with the increase of his lips shall he be filled. I think this is saying, or I believe this is saying, and I think it's biblical, your tongue, the mouth, what you say is incredibly important. We can destroy lives. We can build people up. It's way harder to build stuff than it is to destroy stuff. Have you noticed that? Way harder. But we can tear people down with our tongue in, 15 seconds. do damage that will take months to rebuild sometimes. But if you have edifying speech and you've built in the habit of not tearing people down and building people up, and not, if you don't have anything good to say about somebody, don't say anything at all, then honestly, you'll be blessed. And I've seen that in my job throughout the years where I get blessed. Yes, I'm a hard worker, but I also don't tear people down. Really, there's one time I waited a year to say something bad about somebody. He was a capable person, but I had some serious issues with him, and he eventually got fired. I waited a year before I ever said anything bad. And then other people were saying stuff bad, and then I piled on. And I regret it to this day. It's the dumbest thing. Like, what? Like, I got no satisfaction out of that other than a brief, oh yeah, he was really horrible or something. We need to really watch our speech. It's so important. I work with lots of people, and before I got a job, I heard this word called teamwork. I didn't really understand. I mean, what does teamwork mean? Well, duh. Okay, you're working as part of a team. But go out there and be part of a team that doesn't really work together. That's like being, okay, it's not quite like, but what if you're married to a woman and you're not working together? You're going to be pulling apart. You're going to be fighting all the time. It's going to be chaos. It's similar in the workforce. And if you don't have unity, just like we do in a church, if you don't have that speech that edifies, then you will have a fleshly, carnal reaction to all these things. And you know what? I hate the word toxic because it gets used by the left. It's a pretty apt description, though, because it does eventually make the environment toxic, and you hate going to work. So what you say edifies you, what you say can destroy, and we need to be conscious of that. Verse 21, death and life are in the power of the tongue, and they that love it shall eat the fruit thereof. I mean, this is what I've just been saying. Except death and life are in the power of the tongue. I mean, let's focus on that for a minute, because where is literal life? I mean, it's with the gospel. And so you can communicate that to people. Now, they still have to go through the 3-step process of learning and then understanding and applying it before they can get saved. You can't make somebody saved, but you can communicate the information, or at the very least, hand out a tract. Verse 22 is a good one. Whoso findeth a wife findeth a good thing. You like that, ladies? You're being called a thing. Pat my wife on the head and say, you're a good thing. Okay. She'll break my glasses. So findeth a good thing and obtaineth favor of the Lord. So if you have a wife, you're going to obtain favor of the Lord. So that's nice. Now, how does this contrast with Paul's comments? He's like, basically, if you're single, stay single because you're focused. But if you're going to burn or, with lust, I'm paraphrasing here, then, go ahead and get married if you lack the self-control. But if you're tough like me, I mean, you can read it that way. Well, here's the thing. There are people that God has made to fulfill certain tasks that he wants to stay single. I think there's some people who've also missed out on life because they've made bad mistakes, who end up being single. But Adam wasn't created without Eve. I mean, he was, but then God created Eve. Okay, so it's pretty obvious that the basic plan for man is to have a wife, and the basic plan for women is to have a husband. It's not for you to be single. It's not for you, you know, and society now is like, well, I don't want kids. I want to live a life and party. But okay, that's fun and whatever. I get it. But do you think people have kids because they're idiots? I mean, yeah, I guess there's some people who don't know how birth control works. But I mean, we chose to have children. I mean, I've heard the birth control joke more than once after I've said how, you know. Usually I always like to say, oh, you have kids? What are they, you know, how old are they? And I go, well, let's see, we have a 6, a 5, let's see, we have a 3, and then a 1, and a 1. Like, huh? You know, their brains are just like, you know, like an old pinball machine. When you try shaking it, they just go tilt. And so that was always fun. But that's God's plan. You can run it, you can avoid it for yourself. And there are certain exceptions, like I said, and the Bible states that. And if I had been paying attention, I would have looked those verses up and shared them with you. And that's why I try to tell my children, is that God has this plan, and you can deviate from it, and you can say, I don't want this. But we love our children. I mean, we had 6. We weren't planning on 6. We originally planned on 4, but then we had, you know, we had 2 boys, and then we had 2 girls. And people are like, oh, you're done. But neither Rebecca or myself were like, this just feels like 4 kids in 4 years and like we're done. That just feels, I don't know. And so we decided to have one more, 5, an even 5. That's what we were going for. And then God gave us a bonus kid, which Clell's the youngest, so he's the bonus kid. Anyway, so, you know, God has his plan. We have our plans, God has his plan. But a wife is a good thing, and we're favored if we have a wife. And I think that's something that's good to keep in mind. All right. The poor useth entreaties, but the rich answereth roughly. So entreaties are basically, you know, you're pleading, you're asking for something. Hey, don't tax me so much. I can't afford it. Right? I mean, that basically helped trigger our revolution. You know, we talk about the tax on tea. You know, they'd put up with all sorts of stuff. There were other things too that triggered it, but that was a part of it. But what the rich answereth roughly. I mean, I read a thing very recently about the colonists writing to the king, pleading with him to, you know, just help them out. This is too much for them. And he answered roughly. You know, and I think it's a real blessing that, you know, our God, you know, he's not like that, right? He doesn't answer roughly. I can answer roughly to my kids, right? But God doesn't do that with us. You know, even if we're away from him, you know what, and we're not living quite like we should, we really need his help when we call out. I think he'll help you. I mean, you shouldn't say like, well, I'm not going to pray about this. Now, if you have iniquity in your heart, yeah, that's a problem. But God can still help people. And sometimes I pray for unsaved people that God will help them in a certain way. And I always want them to get saved. And I always say, but I will pray that God helps them in this issue because I care about them, and I'm really praying that by God helping them with something, that will show that God cares about them. I have no idea if they ever see that, but I will do that sometimes. The rich answereth roughly. The pandemic, so much wealth transferred, being inflation destroys the savings and bank accounts. And it's just, we see that in our society today I'm not a communist and I do not advocate any of that stuff. But, basically there's a saying, something like capitalism is the least bad of all the other systems. That's not the right saying, but the point is capitalism is not this pure as in a new driven snow. Capitalism is just the best of everything, of anything there is. Capitalism gets used for all sorts of stuff. People, if they're not held accountable, they'll poison the ground. And hey, I'm an evil conservative, but guess what? I don't want the ground to have, poisonous chemicals in there. I don't want to be breathing smoke and toxic fumes all the time. I have asthma. I do care about those things. And as a Christian, that's not communist. That's just, hey, God says we're supposed to be good stewards of stuff. So, you can argue about where you draw that line. That's up to you. If you litter on your own property, are you being a bad steward? I don't know. It's your property. That's between you and God. But thankfully, God listens to us. All right. Verse 24. A man that hath friends must show himself friendly. And there is a friend that sticketh closer than a brother. I don't do very good on the first half of this. I don't have a lot of friends, and the ones I do have, I don't show myself very friendly to. Pastor knows that. So, and I apologize for that. This verse convicts me frequently. And I do try, I'm just not hard enough, so I'm more convicted reading it now. But as a friend will fail you. Your wife will fail you. And I always remind myself that it's an arm of flesh. Flesh will fail you. We can't depend on other people. Now, do I depend on my wife to cook dinner? Yes. Sometimes she fails me, though. So, but God will always take care of us. What does that mean? Does it mean he necessarily makes the problem go away? No, but frequently he does. And I think that we underestimate how often he makes those problems go away. I cannot tell you how many times over the past 10 probably my entire life, honestly, but I've been paying more attention over the past 10 or so years, just how many times, oh, here's a big deal, and then it just disappears. Like somebody will say, we need to do this, and he's like the boss man, and then it just goes away. And I'm like, whew, dodged a bullet. I don't know what happened, but the friend that sticketh closer than a brother, Jesus is our friend, right? We have God our Father and Jesus who's our friend, and it's important to realize, although they are, Jesus is God and everything, we do have that friend in Jesus. And we need to treat him like a friend and spend time with that friend and nurture that relationship. And that's why I'm kind of trying to add a little bit more, like just time where I'm not just reading or studying or praying. I'm just trying to kind of talk to God. I'll do some reading and stuff, and I'll just And that takes time. And I'm not great at it. But I think it allows, when you do that, first of all, we live in a state of, constant agitation with all the dopamine fixes and everything. But you just, you can hear God's voice, and he can bring thoughts to the surface that you wouldn't have been able to hear before. So, anyway, what a friend we have in Jesus. All right, that's the end of chapter 18, so we'll start chapter 19 next week, and I will pray and we'll be dismissed. Dear Lord, we thank you for this day, and we thank you for just how you've done so much for us, Lord. I mean, just the gift of salvation alone is something we can never adequately thank you for, but you bless us daily, and not just with what we need. You give us many of our wants. You want us to be happy, Lord. You are our Father, and we thank you for just having such a great Father. And I just pray that today we can really give thanks to you for everything that you've done for us. And I just pray that you bless the services today, this worship service and song service and everything, Lord, and just help us to be attentive and to learn and to apply these things, Lord. I pray these things in Christ's name. Amen.